So I wanted to share after reading, I guess this Bible verse. It seemed like reminded me of evangelizing. Um, you know, I guess friends or coworkers or other people that I encounter with when they sort of question about you know if there's a God or um, like how to believe in God, or like, can I believe God before I die? Then do I go to heaven? That kind of questions. But mainly the two, I guess two stories or memories that popped up in my head was, I guess one was when I was in like elementary school. I remember like a VBS, or whenever there's like a sort of Sunday school events, the teachers, I remember that they would ask us, or ask me or the group of, elementary school kids to bring their friends or non-believer friends from school each week. And, you know, you'll get a prize, or you get like a sticker. And then at the end of the month or 2 month or at the end of the VBS, you'll get a prize for it. And I guess I wasn't very good at asking, um, my non-Christian friends at school, and to join church events. And it just, I guess, I barely had maybe one. I don't really remember how many people that I invited them over to church, but compared to other of my friends at the church, they'll bring new friends every week, and I'm looking, oh wow, like they're really good at it and they're getting like a prize for it. But at the same time, I didn't really understand why. I guess there was a conflict within me, and I sort of, I was thinking, if I remember correctly, I think this was what I was thinking, how everything is, controlled by God, and how, like, I don't really need to do anything. Plus, why, those kids are coming for, little gifts, and how can you give people to make them believe in God? And that was sort of playing in my mind, I think. And then that sort of shaped my, I guess, like who I am at this point. That was I guess, one of the major, I guess, pivotal moment, I would say. Or the second one is, I guess, when I was in college. Same thing. My best friend who don't believe in, or who went to church, became agnostic when he went to college. But he was keep just, I guess, being sarcastic, or making fun of when I bring up this issues or stories about, oh, you should go to church. And he would always, sort of retaliate by, I would just believe in him, or at the end of, my last breath, and I could go to heaven. But and I didn't really have any good answer to that. And plus, I guess at that time I was also going through like a transition, or like a period when I sort of needed a new knowledge, meaning the conventional stuff, or conventional, I guess, teachings. I don't know. I don't want to say teachings, but the stuff that I learned from church, I mainly went to Korean American church, so it was very, I would say, somewhat segregated, and plus there wasn't much of, I guess, like a community involvement within, within the city that we lived in, or within the community other than Korean American community. We didn't really do anything. And whenever there's like a social issues or current events that you learn at school, or you learn from watching the news, or um, the other stuff that you you counter, or you engage with when you're in college, or even if outside of the college, that you learn all this new stuff. Like for me, I think I mentioned this already, but like I think it's my memory is fuzzy, but I think Michael Brown was one of the major like a current event or the stuff that happened when I was in St. Louis, and nobody really mentioned about that incident at the church. It was just like, oh, didn't really happen to our community, so it's okay, or I just continue to pray. And that sort of clashed within, I guess, my mind. And I didn't understand why people, or at the church at the time, why don't we talk about this? Like, how can we make the world a better place when we always talk about peace and love at church, but when it ends on Sunday. So when we talk about peace and love and on Sunday, but it just ends there, and then we just move on the rest of the week and come back and talk about love and peace again, and how great God is, and they're prospering or helping us to make ourselves better, or economically or financially, we're doing well because of the bless and the grace of God. But that didn't really make sense at all when it came down to the social justice or social events or anything that sort of helped or sort of unified different communities of different ethnic backgrounds. And we always go to the mission, or make those short trips to the other countries when we are sort of neglecting what's happening around us. And whenever I sort of bring it up to the pastor, my college pastors, or even I guess the head or the lead pastor, it's sort of, I guess, I was being a little bit provocative sometimes, but maybe I was challenging them in a sense that sort of in a disrespectful way. I could see that somewhat when it came down to that kind of subject. But the answer or the response that I get was similar to what we read today. You're not focusing on God, you're focusing on the other issues. And nowadays, we live in so many divergent belief systems, and that sort of leads, it sort of leads us, or making us, or clouds our decision by concluding that there's no absolute truth, and then you're deviating from God once you talk about politics, or social justice, or any racial issues that we're seeing. We should focus on God, and nowadays people are they choose God of their choice. So that's wrong, and then that's the response that I get, and that sort of troubled me all the time. That I didn't really have an answer to that either back then. But and pretty much that they're saying that I was insatiable to a new thing, or I'm looking for a solution that sort of going against God's teaching, but which I disagree. But I was viewed as, for at the time, that I was sort of like Athenians, I guess. But when I read through those, read through the Bible verse, at the end, Paul explains, you shouldn't idolize anyone. There's a God, or there's a Christ who died for us and resurrected for us. But some people laugh at it. I guess it could be a cultural background is different. I mean, I would imagine if someone comes up to me and say, there's this God that, other than the God that I believe in, and his the absolute truth, and I think the similar reaction that I'll sort of show them, and I'll like, dude, I believe in Christ for many years, but you're coming in and saying that just doesn't. It's kind of ridiculous. But at the same time, Paul, there are some people who decided to follow Paul based on his preach And based on, I guess, I wasn't at the moment when Paul was preaching, but I would imagine that, he had showed, or people were probably observing him very closely, who were sort of interested in the, I guess, the new thing at the time, which was, Paul was a new preacher at the time for them. So, but regardless, they were sort of, I'm guessing they were observing him very closely, and they were listening to his words, sort of, move them to, or make them decide to follow him. But I think that sort of, I guess, moment, it's not, we talk about evangelizing others, but I think it's more like recognizing, meaning, how Paul's famous, verse say, he confessed that, I'm crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but it is Christ who lives within me. And I do believe God reveals Christ to us and from within us. And, but to take a step forward to that is not just finding Christ within me, it's also the recognizing the Christ within others as well. And I think that's what happened for those followers who followed Paul, was they saw and recognized the Christ within Paul. And when they truly, realized that, the living Christ within him, they started to follow him. And I guess it could go vice versa. When you recognize the Christ within yourself and you start recognizing Christ within the others, even though the Christ within the others may not have resuscitated, you become humble, you become to serve them, to help them to, or encourage them to revive the Christ within themselves at the same time. So I think recognizing is very crucial, and I think recognizing is what this verse is trying to tell me, rather than evangelizing someone. I guess evangelizing to me was a little bit violent, still now, because throughout the history, a lot of many Christians have tried to evangelize some other people or the other ethnic backgrounds, and during the process, a lot of people who got crucified. But at the same time, us Christians did kill a lot of people. So, but I think in the process, we are so focused on evangelizing others that we didn't recognize the others that as a human being and as a potential Christian. And without that, it could become very, very violent. And just wanted to share that we should recognize rather than evangelizing, or recognizing rather than evangelizing, so that we can respect one another. And eventually, if I'm a good Christian, or if we are a good Christian, then people will start recognizing us and try to, seek for Christ within each individual. And that will sort of drive the non-believers or people who haven't met God will eventually follow the footsteps of Christ. And that's what I wanted to share today.